Welcome back to the channel. And today, I want to do this video. This is a bit out of my element. This is this is not the type of content I generally speak about. But I wanted to share, my opinion and just give my thoughts on this incident with Zach Stacy, um, and a video, kind of like a video response to Cynthia G about a video she did about Zach Stacy, and basically the brutality that he exhibited in a video where he attacked he attacked, I guess, his ex-girlfriend, and the baby, their baby, was right there witnessing it all. It's a very violent act, and I just thought it was important, to talk about this because what Cynthia G was talking about in her video, and if you don't know who Cynthia G is, to me, I look at Cynthia G like, they do these videos about relationships and culture, mostly of African American men, and it has a very negative view and negative outlook on African American men, and there have been many questions posed about what would be, or so to speak, some of the personalities in the African American communities. Like if you're talking about someone like Kevin Samuels or Tommy Sotomayor, right? What would be the counterparts to them? And that was a question that had been coming up kind of on my radar over the last few weeks. And, because I had been, viewing and speaking with a YouTuber who actually had, did a video about it, and about Cynthia G and her entire opinions about African American men. Myself being an African American man, I think that has a lot to do with probably the interest that I've gained on it over maybe the last month or so. But I want to speak on it a little bit, and but looking, going back to what I was saying earlier about, what would be the counterpart to, these personalities like Tommy Sotomayor, and, some people try to rank Kevin Samuels in there as well. Who would be the female version of it? And, after, I had known who Cynthia G was, but I just never really got that, invested in a lot of, her content. And I think I learned about her from watching Tommy Sotomayor, right? He came across the radar, and of course, he had some sensational, things that I thought were just, mostly about entertainment. But within entertainment is some elements of truth, in these things, and so it seemed to me that someone like Cynthia G would be the counterpart of maybe someone like Tommy Sotomayor. I don't think I would say someone like Kevin Samuels. Kevin Samuels, I kind of see in a different element, but I would kind of compare her as the opposite of Tommy Sotomayor, maybe from a from the perspective of a female, right? African American female, in that, and both of these personalities are on extreme sides of the spectrum. But what she had been saying earlier, and it kind of lured my spirit a little bit, and that was that a lot of the black African American men who reacted to this video from this ex NFL player Zach Stacy, the first questions that they were asking were, what did she do for him to attack her that way? And I just want to let Cynthia G know that I'm an African American man, and that was not my first thought process. When I saw this, I was like, my spirits dropped. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's unnecessary. Doesn't make a lot of sense because, the thing about it is, no matter what she did, even if you look at something from a legal standpoint, if you look at punishment fitting a crime, right? If the action of a person isn't in the area of what you're doing in retaliation against it, right? Or your reaction to it. If it doesn't fit what they've done, right, then it's not right to do it. And so, in a case like this, where there's this physical violence, and I mean, he's tossing this woman around like a rag doll. You know, this is an NFL player now. And she's looks like she might be, I don't know, 120 pounds, something like that. It's just crazy. And so he's tossing her around. And my thought process is whatever she did, uh, it wouldn't be relative to her doing that to him, right? And so, in addition to that, you know, my first thought process was just that, it wasn't about what she did. It was about he's just went too far, right? And it seemed like one of these people who have a lot of problems with anger management and things like that. But whatever it was, his situation was, that was totally on him to carry out that action like that, right? So it's wrong. And that's the first thing came to my mind, right? Not what she did, but his reaction to that and what he's doing, right? Now, to Cynthia G's defense, and I have to kind of tell it like it is. Her statement was that, many African American black men were on social media asking what she did and not looking at what Stacy was doing. And I have to be honest and agree with her that many of the commentary I came across, from African American personalities, social media, YouTube, and the like, uh, that was a big, question that was coming up. That was seeming to be statements formed around that, and those ideas coming out of their mouths first. And I thought that was, not the proper way to look at it. And I just want Cynthia G to know that not every African American, man, I think saw that situation like that. I didn't see it like that. I saw it was like it really didn't matter, even if she would have slapped him in his face and she would have said, "I cheated on you with your best friend," or "I'm leaving here," or "I'm taking all your money," whatever the case would have been, it still wouldn't have added up to his actions, right? And so I think that's very important to understand that. Now, just take it a little bit further, because she speaks a lot about, black male pathology, right? Um, and I want to be very respectful and approach this from a educational standpoint. A lot of the characterizations of African American men, I think Cynthia G is probably talking about, is, I think some of it might be stemming from the idea of the Pookie and the Ray Ray, right? And and I want to say something about that idea, because a lot of times when Pookie and Ray Ray gets mentioned, then it follows in this very negative connotation, right? But I want to just open up some things historically, and maybe just show a different viewpoint. It may in hopes to maybe understand this a little bit, clearer. Excuse me. So when you think of the idea of the Pookie and the Ray Ray, because this seems to be the type of characterization personalities. I believe they use words like Dusties and things like that. I'm not very familiar with that word. Apparently, it's been out and people know what it is, but what we do know, we know it's a very negative term, right? Is basically description wise, the type of these negative African American influences and personalities that she's speaking about. But when you look at the kind of what comes to mind about a Pookie and a Ray Ray type personality, and And because that generally seems like what she's explaining. Like oftentimes when she's talking about, African American men not taking care of their responsibilities, whether it be their children or they're mistreating their wives and so on and so forth. I'm sure that doesn't uh, exclude maybe black professionals and the like, and maybe African American men of maybe a certain caliber or what have you, because we know these traits can go across the spectrum. But it when at least the videos of her I've seen, oftentimes the type of people that have been presented have kind of resembled like the this imagery of the Pookie and the Ray Rays, right? So, but of course, in this case, it's an ex NFL player, right? So maybe that can expand the spectrum a bit. But the point I'm trying to make about some of this being around the Pookie and the Ray Ray characters is that if you look at the situation with African American men, particularly going back to pre-civil rights, right, and then periods after civil rights, where even though laws created the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when a law is made, of course, there is it extends over that period, and then there are things that are still residue left over. So where I'm going with this is maybe if you go back before, in the 1960s, 1970s, periods of the 80s, and so on and so forth, even up to now, I guess you could say to a certain degree. Um, these people were kind of like they would be more the rebel to the system, and this was a time when you had police officers who, weren't the laws weren't for African Americans. They weren't equal with African American laws, right? So what you would have is these rebel like people, would have been the protectors, right? So the Pookie and the Ray Rays of maybe the old days would have been the good guys, so to speak, right? Another thing, uh, and so in certain elements, right, what you deem to be the protector of the African American culture, right? Uh, those people in a system where they look at it as anti them, then those people who are more opposed to the system would be the good, it would be the good guys in that system, would be the men of that system, would be the alpha males of that system. So that probably was the case then. But when you fast forward to modern times, what you get is now you get uh, uh, maybe that mentality still locked on, right? And it is still in the DNA of the African American communities. So then, that culture of people, that group of people will still flock to that. And so, and in some cases, it makes sense, right? Because if you're, let's say, in a certain urban community, then the more valuable uh, uh, um, person in a relationship, so to speak, is kind of going to be that kind of person, that kind of Pookie and Ray Ray person. In their environment, they would be good because this may be a difficult environment to navigate, and you're probably going to need someone like that to survive, right? So, so in that sense, I could see why psychologically there may be some binding to those type of personalities. Now, unfortunately, in certain rough elements and communities, if you have something like that, if you have that type of alpha male and that type of masculinity, right, then in a very harsh environment like that, you might have a certain type of uh, uh, you know, I don't want to say anger, but a certain physical uh, reaction to many things, right? Because that's going to be a person in a mindset. They're not going to let you push them over. They're not going to let certain things go, and this can be played out in a very masculine way, right? And there's no excuse for this. I'm just saying that there may be some residue from what I'm saying here that is still part of that African American community. I remember even when I was growing up, I remember older uncles and great uncles and things like that. They would be speaking about women like we were kind of in the Ike Turner days, right? And where there was probably a lot of abuse of women back then. It was and there was a different culture on how maybe the alphas, right, in those particular communities handled, the opposite sex and so on, right? I think part of the issue, I guess what I'm trying to get out here is that when it comes to the environment we live in today, obviously it's a different environment. Physical violence of this magnitude is met by the system with a great deal of severity, right? And when people snap this way or they go about something this way, it's going to be big consequences to be paid behind this, right? And this NFL player Zach Stacy, being a former NFL player, right? So it's not like even he's some big NFL player that would have you know m- uh, many of the PR and things and resources to uh, to maybe handle or navigate a situation like this. Reports are coming that he's been out of the league over 5 years. He's driving a 2020 Kia or something, and and so it's even that much worse. With how he's going to meet this condition. This is totally inexcusable, though. No matter what the situation is or what situation he would have been in, it would have still been the same. That this is totally unacceptable. It's inhumane, and everybody should keep their hands to themselves first of all, right? There should be no reason for this, right? So there's just no excuses for his behavior at all. And I just want people like Cynthia G to understand that all African American men don't think the same. Excuse me, guys. I always forget to turn off my notifications. And of course, this is something. This kind of act of violence. I know she's using this to validate some of the points she makes about African American men. And I gotta admit, this one does look really bad. This really fits with her content. It's really, really bad, and very, very sad and unacceptable. But um, you know, what we have to expand to in this though is that this is something that isn't race related, right? And I want Cindy G to understand that you know there's nothing wrong with dating interracially. I come from the South Florida area, Miami area, where that's very commonplace. It's never been a problem um, of a severe degree. With much of things I've been around. I think the biggest problem is when the generalization, the categorization of, and then the lack of tolerance, for when people start to just go, well, I'm only going to date this race of people, right? That type of preference. I think it's very dangerous, you know what I mean? Because it creates a lot of prejudgment. And I think that's part of the big issue with what Cynthia G, does with like over 90% of her content regarding African American men. But I also would say that um, that this is something that expands races, right? And I'll just get this quick story real quick. Brutality and even to the length of murder, how things can go. So I worked in investment banking, many, many years. And I actually used to live like a block around the corner from Donald Trump, right, in Palm Beach. And one of my investment firms were there. And there was a big story that had been circulating around the area about this multimillionaire. He was a Caucasian person, and he married a black woman, and the divorce came through, and she was about to, try to get all this money from him, and he was convicted, many years later of sending basically a hitman posing as a delivery person to murder her at her front door, right? And he was eventually, caught and charged. But this was on the other side of the spectrum, right? This was a white Caucasian person going to this degree of violence and brutality and murdering this woman. And so this isn't race related, right? This isn't, now I do admit, as I brought up the kind of Pookie and the Ray Ray stuff, how on one hand you could see them as the good, the good protectors of the communities, because they were going to be, if you really think about in a civil rights era world, that I think is still leftover residue from that. But those people were going to be the resistors the most, right? And they were going to be probably the most active in defending the community, right? What's happened now as we fast forward to the future, I think that they're still left over, right? They're the biology, the DNA is still there. And so maybe it's a slow process and moving up a little bit further. But the reality of the situation, when you're looking at alpha males and masculinity, right? My days on Wall Street, those people were some of the most vicious, uh, uh, when it comes to masculinity, right? Or even ideas like toxic masculinity. The type of people I worked with, these were killers, right? Sharks, right? In how they dealt with people and how they treated people. And these weren't good people, right? These weren't, and they did many of the things that abused their girlfriends and wives. That many of the things that Cynthia G is putting on black males. This was something that was going on in many other cultures of people. Now, of course, it's maybe differently handled and dealt with in certain classes of people, certain legal senses, wealth classes. Because you're going to have good lawyers, you're going to have money to pay people off, you're going to have a lot of stuff. So it's going to play out differently. But that doesn't mean that these mentalities aren't going to be present there, right? So I would like to, make that clear to a lot of people that that's not necessarily going to be a solution to this problem. This is a overall problem, right? Yes, it probably looks a little bit more ugly in the African American community simply because of a lot of the history and the socioeconomic clamps that have been on African American people, right? And again, there's a point where everything comes down to personal responsibility. So, not excusing any of that. Like I started the video, I didn't excuse any of this, but this isn't something just geared toward African American men, and this isn't all African American men, right? Obviously it isn't, right? And um, whereas I have seen a lot of people attack Cynthia G, a lot of African American men are upset with Cynthia G because of many of the statements and the content she releases. The last one, I think had to do with aborting black babies and so on, and that infuriated many people, right? And I thought that was totally inappropriate and inexcusable as well. But there are some things that Cynthia G has said, like in the case of Zach Stacy here. There are some things that I think need to be acknowledged and not condoned, not excused. And this is one of them, right? And obviously that doesn't mean she's correct on everything. She's way out there on many things, right? But I think she should be allowed to do these type of platforms And I think, her voice should be heard on these type of, as long as it's being done on the other side. As long as we have people like Tommy Sotomayor, you're going to have the counterpart to that. And I certainly think Cynthia G is that. Even though I don't agree with 90% of the things she says, there are some things that we can't condone and that we do have to call out. And Zach Stacy is one of those things. But that's all I want to say in this video. This is my first time, I think, really doing content like this. I think some years ago, I might have weighed in a little bit on Tommy Sotomayor and Tariq Nasheed, a feud they were having. But this is something I'm going to regularly do. I just, wanted to give my opinion this time around because when I saw the video, it had such a negative impact on me. I didn't like how it looked. And especially even with like the O.J. Simpson trial, there are people still walking around, and there's even though the court of law proved O.J. innocent, a lot of people don't believe O.J. Simpson is innocent. Obviously they think he had something to do with the murder, and that's very, very sad. And you see this ex-football player doing what he did, right? Because you got to think of, him doing this in that sense, the type of anger he exuded, how he did it. This is